Phone call. Unlisted numbers. Not even a thing anymore. Hello. What's my favorite scary movie? That would be Halloween. Yeah, you silly bastard. I said Halloween. You're gonna gut me like a fish. You can go pound sand. You're in my house. I highly doubt that, you crazy bastard. Yeah. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today it's going to be a Scream, baby. That's right, we're going to talk about the 1996 film Scream. This is a revisited review because I reviewed this way back when I first started my channel, but I was never happy with that review, so we're going to do it again. And I hope you all enjoyed that cool little intro that my son shot, and I did the terrible acting in it. But yes, Scream came out December 20th of 1996, had a budget of $14 million, and upon release, it took time to get there. It made $103 million in America and $173 worldwide, so it was a huge hit for Dimensions and the Weinstein brothers. This was a love child of Kevin Williamson. He wrote this film, and he was trying to sell a script in Hollywood. He wasn't having any luck. Actually, his first script he wrote was Teaching Mrs. Tingle, which he went on to make years later, that he directed. But he wasn't having any luck. And finally, the Weinstein brothers read the script, liked it. Wes Craven was interested. They signed Wes Craven on to do the first one and the sequels, because Williamson already had an outline for part 2 and a part 3, although part 3 changed drastically once they got to that point, because Williamson was busy with a little show called Dawson's Creek and other projects, so he couldn't come back to fully concentrate on Scream 3, and they brought in a different writer. Now, to be in this film, we have Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott. She was in The Craft the same year that this came out. She was also in The Craft, and she was on Party of Five at the time. Courtney Cox plays Gail Weathers, and she was on Friends at the time, as we all know. And David Arquette is in this film as Deputy Dewey. And Skeet Ulrich plays Billy Loomis, a nod to Donald Pleasance's character in Halloween, because Kevin Williamson loved Halloween, and he plays Sidney's boyfriend. Matthew Lillard plays Stu. Him and Billy are best friends. Jamie Kennedy plays Randy, our subsequent film nerd of the film. Joseph Witt plays Sheriff Burke. I'm going to bring him up because he was also in Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street as a deputy in that film, and he plays the sheriff in this one. Rose McGowan plays Tatum, and Drew Barrymore plays Casey. And she shot her whole film, part of the film, which is the beginning part, as we all know if you've never seen this film. It's going to be spoiler heavy. In the first 5 days of production, they shot Drew Barrymore out, and Henry Winkler plays the principal of the school, and obviously Henry Winkler was the Fonz. That's what he's mostly known for, but he produced a bunch of shows later on. In the beginning of the film, what sets Scream apart at the time, just to go back to the 90s, horror box office-wise was not doing so well. Yes, there was a bunch of Stephen King adaptations in the 90s of some of his novels that didn't do very well. Graveyard Shift didn't do very well at the box office. I liked that film, but it wasn't a box office juggernaut. Later on, Thinner. I mean, I can dig Thinner to a certain point. That wasn't a box office hit. We did have some good horror films in the 90s. I think the 90s horror films get shit on a lot, but there are some really good films. Exorcist 3 came out in 1990. You had John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness in 94, which is a terrific horror film. You even had Wes Craven's New Nightmare in 94. But unfortunately, none of these set the box office on fire. It wasn't until 96 when this came out that reignited the slasher genre, but also horror in general, and brought it back to box office prominence. Now, being in this movie, we get that awesome opening of Drew Barrymore at her house, alone, waiting for her boyfriend to show up. Her parents are out for the night, although they do show up then, as we all know if you've seen this film. And she starts getting phone calls, very reminiscent of When a Stranger Calls. The beginning, the first 20 minutes of that film is kind of like this film, only Kevin Williamson elaborated on it and made it a lot different. And she's harassed on the phone. They'll kill her boyfriend, and there's that chase that ensues. She gets killed. Her parents come home and find a body hanging from the tree. And then we're into our movie, getting introduced to our main character, which is Sidney Prescott and her friends. And we see her and Billy right in the beginning, because he sneaks over to her house at night to have a chat with her about their relationship. And then we're introduced to, well, the rest of the cast, but also the school, the setting, the town. Wes Craven does a nice job setting the town up. Wes Craven overall does a really nice job with his film directing. I mean, he's a seasoned director by this point in his career. He made many films up before 96, and obviously one classic, One Nightmare on Elm Street, and other classics as well. And they even tie it into, like, there's even a little nod to Nightmare on Elm Street during the film, which we'll talk about. And the school, we introduced to Gale Weathers, Deputy Dewey, and we're introduced to school is in panic because of the murder of these two teenagers who went to school with them, their classmates, and they're interviewing all the kids to see if they can get any clues to what may have happened to them. And if we're introduced to Gale, the friction between Gale Weathers and Neve Campbell's character here. Her mom was killed a year before this, and Gale Weathers covered that story, and Neve Campbell's character is not happy with Gale Weathers, so they have a very confrontational relationship. And Sydney gets harassed at home. Her father goes away on this business trip, and she gets a phone call. And Billy shows up at the house after Sid gets chased by a Ghostface killer, and the cops arrest Billy because they think it was him. He has a cell phone on. This is back in '96 before cell phones were really a big thing. This is right in the beginning of where the internet was really starting to get into households. Not my household, but other places. It took forever to get in my little town. And then we start that dichotomy between Sydney and Billy. Their relationship becomes more strained, obviously. And then there's some more kills. Principal Henry Winkler's character gets killed unceremoniously. It's a cool scene, and that's when we get Wes Craven's cameo as the janitor dressed in a Freddy Krueger sweater. That's a cool little scene, a cool nod to Nightmare on Elm Street. And then the finale takes place at Stu's house. They're having this big bash, and they're watching Halloween on the TV. Basically, I love the last 15-20 minutes because Halloween is playing on the background throughout the rest of the climax of this film. We get our twists and turns, and then finally the killers are revealed to be Billy and Stu. And they're trying to set up her father to take the fall. And Billy's taking revenge more so because of Sid's mother had slept with his father and broke up his family, and his mother abandoned him. Stu, we get the sense, he just says peer pressure, that's why I'm doing it. I think Stu's partly psychotic, and partly that is some of it, peer pressure from Billy. I don't think Stu had a really good motive to turn into a killer. I just think he thought it was probably a fun thing to do. That's just me saying that. I don't know if that's true. But if watching this film many times over the years, I think that's probably what Stu's whole role in this is, that Billy talked him into it, and he just said, okay, something to do with my best friend. And then Sid kills both killers at the end, and Dewey's alive, Randy's alive, Sid's alive, and Gale Weathers is alive, and that's the end of the film. When this hit back in '96, I mean, again, like I said, this was an adrenaline shot to the horror genre in cinema. This is the first time in a while that a horror film made as much money as this film made off a $14 million budget. So it was something special back then. Now, this dropped around Christmas time. That was the Harvey Weinstein's idea. That wasn't Wes Craven or Kevin Williamson's idea. Usually, typically don't release a horror film at Christmas time. But they took a chance. And it only opened at $6 million opening weekend, but it grew over time through word of mouth. That's how it got to $103 million. I didn't see this until May of 1997. I went to the drive-in theaters, the Laurel Drive-In in McAdoo, Pennsylvania. Me and a couple friends went, and we saw it in the drive-in, which was a cool experience. And I've always loved this film. This is definitely a great slasher film. I'm not saying it's on par with Halloween or Black Christmas, but it's up there. It's definitely in my top 10 slasher films of all time. It's very well done. It's very well shot by Wes Craven. It's very well paced. The witty dialogue is on par. And I know it's very meta, which Wes Craven's New Nightmare was very meta. So Wes Craven kind of already got his meta one. That was his warm-up to this film. Sadly, I love New Nightmare. It just didn't do that well. But this was a welcome change, and this definitely reinvigorated the slasher, because right after this, we had I Know You Did Last Summer, written by Kevin Williamson. We had Urban Legend, I Still Know You Did Last Summer, Urban Legends 2, so on and so forth. They were starting to make slasher films again, which was a fun time in the 90s, early 2000s. They wore it out very fast, and plus we got 2 more Scream sequels around this time, 2 and 3. 2 came out the next year, and then 3 came out, I think, in 2000. But it was a great time for horror at that particular moment. Some of those films, even the knockoffs, are pretty good. Some of them aren't so good, but some of them are pretty good. The original title of this film was Scary Movie. The Weinsteins didn't like that. They actually came up with Scream, and then they used Scary Movie for the spoof film. The film was submitted 9 times to the MPAA. Wes Craven, throughout his career, always had a hard time with the MPAA, and this was no different for this film to get the rated R. And obviously, like I said, Kevin Williamson was inspired by Halloween. He loved Halloween, obviously, because the Halloween plays throughout the last 15-20 minutes of the film. You always see the cutting back to the TV, showing scenes from that film, so I think that's pretty cool. Overall, this is a great slasher film, and this is one that brought horror again back to promise. Like I said, in the 90s, there was some really great horror films in the 90s. Sadly, they did not do very well at the box office. This is what the horror genre needed, and it always goes through cycles, ups and downs, where it's doing really well, then it kind of falls out, and then something hits really big, and then we get a bunch of imitations. Although, like I said, some of the imitations of this film I do like. I own on Blu-ray. Some of them are really well done. Some of them aren't the greatest films, but it was a great time. And around that time, I had just graduated high school around this time, and it was fun. Plus, this helped get Halloween back on track, because around this time, our horror icons were on the low. Jason's franchise, Friday the 13th franchise, has kind of petered out at this point. New Line was kind of sitting on it after Jason Goes to Hell. Nightmare on Elm Street after New Nightmare was kind of dormant for a long time after that, until Freddy vs. Jason. Halloween had just had Halloween 6 in 95. Didn't do that well. It made some money until H2O came out after this, is what reinvigorated the Halloween franchise. So yeah, Scream is definitely one of those films that helped to bring horror back to the box office and in people's minds. And I love it for it. Wes Craven, I think it helped that they brought in a very seasoned horror director to do this film. And with the great script by Kevin Williamson, and a really good cast, it's definitely of the 90s for sure, but it's such a great slasher film. I love this film. I would give Scream a 9.5 out of 10. 9.5 out of 10 for Scream. What are your thoughts on this 1996 classic slasher film? Leave a comment down below, let me know. Hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. Very important. I'd greatly appreciate that. Share this video, and I'll be back at the end of the week with another review. Until then, bye.